In this video, I'll discuss how to navigate the Gnome desktop environment. There are other desktop environments we can use besides Gnome, including KDE. But with Gnome, the menu bar appears across the top of the screen, where in the upper right, I can see the name of the user currently logged in, which in my case is user root. I can click right on root, and from there I get a menu where I can log out, lock the screen, or power off the machine. I can also see the day of the week and the time, and if I click on that, I can configure date and time settings. I've also got two menus in the upper left. One is called Applications, and the other is called Places. I'm going to click Applications, where under the Internet submenu, I'll choose Firefox web browser. When we launch an application in Linux, if we look to the right of the title bar for the launched application, we've got three control buttons. The first looks like a dash, which will minimize the application. So it's still running, as evidenced by the listing down in the taskbar at the bottom. I could simply click on it once to bring it back up on screen. The second control button looks like a little square, and if I click it, it restores the window so it's no longer full screen. I could click it again, so it's maximized. And of course, the X would close the application. It's no longer running, but I'm going to start it up again. I'm going to launch yet another application from the Applications menu, but this time under Accessories. I'm going to start Calculator. I'm going to right-click on the title bar for the Calculator application, and from there I'm going to choose to move to another workspace. With the Gnome desktop environment, we get 4 workspaces by default. Currently, I am on Workspace 1. We can see that because it's grayed out. I can't send the Calculator app to Workspace 1 because it's already there. We also see that we're on Workspace 1 in the bottom right where it says 1/4. So I'm going to send the Calculator app to Workspace 2. So it disappears from this screen, which is Workspace 1. I can switch to Workspace 2 by clicking the indicator in the bottom right and then just choosing Workspace 2. And there's the Calculator application. But why would you do this? Workspaces let us organize our open windows on the screen. Workspaces are also sometimes called virtual screens. They each have the same kind of desktop environment, but the beauty is in the fact that we can have different open windows in different workspaces to organize the many apps that we might have open at a given time. For example, on this current workspace, which is Workspace 2, I'm going to go to the Applications menu where I'll again go to Accessories, but this time I'll launch the Gedit text editor program. Here we can see we now have 2 open windows available on Workspace 2. If I were to switch to Workspace 3, nothing is there. What I'll do here is perhaps browse the file system, go to my Downloads folder, and open up a PDF that I've previously downloaded from the internet. So we can see that we can use workspaces to organize our open windows to facilitate switching between different sets of apps. In this video, we discussed how to navigate the Gnome desktop environment. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to configure the Gnome environment. Some Linux systems have only a command line, whereas others might have the graphical user interface installed. KDE and Gnome are probably the most commonly used desktop environments for Linux. Here in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we're using the Gnome desktop environment, and we can tweak it to suit our personal preferences. For example, I'm going to right-click on the desktop background, and I'm going to choose the option that says Change Desktop Background. I can see the current image that's in use, so I'll go ahead and click on it. I then get a list of other images that were installed with the operating system that I can select for my desktop background. So I'll go ahead and choose one, and then I'll choose the Select button. We can also configure the appearance of the panel bar across the top of the screen. To do this, we can go to the Applications menu in the upper left. Then we can choose the Utilities submenu, from which we would choose the Tweak tool. The Tweak tool also allows us to customize items on the desktop, such as the icons and their text. In the left-hand navigation panel here in the Tweak tool, it's automatically selected Shell. On the right, I have an option to show the date in the clock. In the upper right in our panel, I can see the day of the week and the time, but not the date. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the slider to on for that option. In the left-hand navigator, I'm going to click Theme. The current icon theme, for example, is high color. That applies to icons in our menu system as well as on our desktop. So what I'm going to do is change that, for example, to high contrast. Here, I can see it's made a change immediately for desktop icons, but it also will have made the change for the icons in our menuing system. In the left-hand navigator, I'll choose Fonts. The current text scaling factor on the right is listed as being 1.0. I'm going to click the plus button numerous times to increase the text scaling factor, but notice it does not apply to the font for desktop icons, but rather for our menu system and of course for items listed at the top of the screen in our panel bar. The other thing to note is that these changes will apply to all of our workspaces. In the bottom right, the workspace selector indicates I'm on workspace 1 of 4. If I click on that and, for example, choose workspace 3, notice everything is the same. So when you make customizations to the Gnome visual environment, they will apply to all of your workspaces. In this video, we discussed how to configure the Gnome environment. In this video, I'll discuss how to get built-in and online help. Unfortunately, nobody knows everything. So periodically, we'll need to refer to documentation to complete a task in Linux. In the upper left, I'll click on the Applications menu and I'll choose Documentation. Here I've got two choices. I can choose Help if I want to learn how to do something in the Gnome desktop environment, or I can view the Red Hat Enterprise Linux release notes where I can get more detailed documentation related to things like configuring storage or a VPN. I'll begin by clicking Help. It's labeled as Gnome Help, and there are a number of links that are categorized, such as desktop, networking, sound, hardware, and so on. But I can also click in the address bar and search for what I need help with. For example, if I want to change the screen lock settings, I might type in lock screen and press enter. Here I can see search results in this help system related to my criteria. So maybe what I'll do is I'll choose the link that says the screen locks itself too quickly. And from here, I'm given the step-by-step instructions on what I need to do to change that. For example, it tells me to click up on my name in the upper right and then to choose Settings, after which I would click Privacy, and there I can see the screen lock options where I might turn it off or change the timing settings. But what if we need to learn how to configure a VPN or the storage subsystem? That help won't be found within the Gnome help system. Instead, I would go to Applications, Documentation, and I would choose the Red Hat Enterprise Linux Release Notes link. This is going to start the Firefox web browser from where I can then view my local help. Notice it's a local path. If I want to go online to make sure I'm looking at the most recent help documentation, I could click the documentation bookmark link. That's placed there automatically here in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So I'll go ahead and click that to make sure I've got the most up-to-date information. Then I'll choose Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And from here, I can see the categories of help that I might be interested in, such as Common Administrative Commands or Networking Guide. I'll click on Networking Guide. In the navigation panel on the left, I then see all of the options that I need related to configuring network settings. But sometimes I need help with a Linux command, even though I'm in the GUI environment. Well, if I go back in my browsing history, I do have Common Administrative Commands in the online documentation. But at the same time, I can also go to my address bar in my web browser, and I could type man: man is short for manual or help page. Here I need to learn more about the ls or the list command in the file system. So what I'm typing in the address bar is man: ls. When I press enter, it opens up a window where it explains the ls command along with all of its command line switches and what they do. In this video, we discussed how to get built-in and online help. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to explore the file system using the Gnome File Manager. When users log into the Gnome desktop environment, in the upper left, they'll see a folder labeled as Home. And if they double-click it, it'll show them the contents of their home directory. Here we'll see files and folders. In the upper left, we have a number of control icons to control the display. If I click the icon that looks like a down-pointing arrow, I can choose to show hidden files. In Linux, hidden files begin with a period. I can also choose the icon that looks like 3 lines of text to view the file system items as a list. In the left-hand navigator, I can also view recent places that were visited in the file system. I can also view the downloads folder, music, pictures, video, trash, and so on. I can also click on Computer in the left-hand navigator to go to the root of the file system. The root of the file system is expressed as a /. Every Linux installation will have many subdirectories on the root that are similar. For example, the dev folder stands for devices. Here we've got files and folders that are used to access hardware devices on our Linux system. Most pieces of hardware are treated as files. For example, there's a file here in the dev folder called SDA. That represents the first SCSI disk in our Linux system. It's then followed by 2 files, SDA1 and SDA2. SDA1 references partition 1 on SCSI disk A, whereas SDA2 references the second disk partition on SCSI disk A. I'm going to click the back arrow to go back 1 level in the hierarchy. Most configuration files in Linux are text files, and they exist somewhere under the /etc folder. The home folder is where we'll see any user home directories. Here I've got a home directory for a user whose account name is C. Blackwell. The proc subdirectory stands for processes. Here I'm going to have subdirectories within it, each which is named based on a numeric value. Now these numeric values are process IDs or PIDs. Whenever we launch a process or an application of some kind in Linux, the operating system kernel assigns it a unique PID or process identifier. It then creates a folder structure in here to track that as it's running. We've also got a var subdirectory down in the vars. var stands for variable. One of the important items about this location is we can go under var, then we can go under log. The system log file is actually called messages. And if I double click to open it up, it's really just a text file, but very important. Notice that all items that are logged are date and time stamped. I'm going to make a link to the messages log file on my desktop for ease of access. I can accomplish this by right-clicking on the file and choosing Make Link. I can see it's made a file here called Link to Messages. What I'm going to do is drag that onto the desktop so that in the future I can simply double-click the link on my desktop to quickly and easily get to the system log file. When we're viewing files in the file system, we also have the option of customizing the column display. For example, I'm going to click in the upper right the down-pointing triangle, and I'm going to choose Visible Columns. Here I'm going to turn on the Permissions column header, and I'll click Close. We can now see the permission set that applies to each listed file system entry. Finally, we can also search the file system using graphical tools. In the left-hand navigator, I'll click on Computer. Then what I'm going to do in the upper right is click the magnifying glass. The magnifying glass opens up a search bar. Here I want to look for any references of the word project. It automatically searches the file system recursively, that means in all subdirectories, and then it shows me the results. In this video, we learned how to explore the file system using the Gnome file manager. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to manipulate files and directories. Using the Gnome desktop environment, if we want to delete a file or a folder, we can simply select it and right-click on it and choose to move it to the trash. When we do that, the trash bin now is the only place where we have a second chance to get the file back. We can see the file that was deleted here in the trash. I can select it and restore it to its original location, or I can empty everything in the trash. Here, I'll select the file that was deleted and I'll restore it. I'm going to go to the Home directory for the currently logged in user by clicking Home in the left-hand navigator. I'll then maximize this window. In the Documents folder, I've got a file called Project. What I want to do is create an organized subdirectory structure on the Linux root file system. And this is going to be one of the files that I place there. So I'm going to right-click and copy the file. In the left-hand navigator, then I'll click Computer. That places me on the root of the file system. So what I will do here is right-click in the blank area on the right and choose New Folder. I'm going to call this User Files, although notice I've mistyped it. So I can right-click and I can choose Rename to rename a file or a folder. It's the same process. I'm then going to double-click to open User Files. Then on the right, I'll right-click and choose New Folder. I want to make a folder here called Projects, and I'd like to make another one called Security. I'm going to open up the Projects folder by double-clicking. Then I'll right-click and paste. There's the project file that we had copied earlier, so I've placed it in an organized location. Then what I'm going to do on the left-hand navigator is click Home again and go to Downloads, where I've downloaded a security-related PDF file. I'm going to right-click and I'm going to cut or move that file. Then I'll click Computer in the left navigator, and on the root of the file system, I'll go under User Files, under Security, where I will paste that document. Now, if I go back to that location where I copied that PDF file, so that's back to Home, Downloads, notice because when I right-clicked, I chose Cut, it's no longer here. So cutting is moving. In this video, we learned how to manipulate files and directories. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to create and edit text files from the desktop environment. In Linux, there are many commands that we can use to create and manipulate text files, but we can also work with text files in the graphical environment. Here in the Gnome desktop environment, in the upper left, I'll click the Applications menu, then I'll choose Accessories, and I'll then click Gedit. Gedit is the Gnome editor. It allows us to work with text files here in the Gnome environment. The first thing I'll do is I'll click Open to open up an existing text file. I have a list of recently used files, so one of them is the Messages log file. I'm going to go ahead and select that file to open it up. When we open up a file, and in this case the log file is rather large, we might find it useful to search for items. So I'll click on the Search menu and I'll choose Find. What I'll look for is the name Blackwell. And we can see it's gone ahead and highlighted all the occurrences of the text Blackwell within this file. I can then use the up and down arrows to proceed through the file to the next or previous occurrence of that search criteria. When I've finished, I can go to the Search menu and I can choose Clear Highlight. But I can also build new files. I'm going to click the File menu and then I'll choose New. Here, I'm going to create some information related to salesperson activity. Once I've entered the data in the text file, I can save it. To do that, I'll click the Save button. I want to save this off of the root of the file system in a folder I've already created called User Files. Under that, I want to store it in a folder called Sales. And what I actually want to name the file is 2014 Sales. I'm going to go ahead and save it. It tells me there's already a file by that name. Well, I want to overwrite it, so I'll click Replace. At this point, I've got something down at the bottom that says Last Update. What I can do here in Gedit is under the Edit menu, I can insert the current date and time. I'll choose the appropriate format and click Insert. So sometimes we need to have something date and time stamped, and this is a convenient way to do it. I'm going to go ahead and save that change. Now, if I ever make a change to the file that I will regret, for example, if I delete a couple of lines and realize I didn't mean to do it, I can use the Undo button to get that data back or to reverse my last change. Of course, I've also got options to cut, copy, and paste information from this file. In this video, we discussed how to create and edit text files from the desktop environment. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to perform login, logoff, and power operations in Linux. If our Linux system has a graphical interface installed, then when we boot up the system, we're going to have a graphical login screen as we see here. Here I will see usernames listed, such as, in our case, Cody Blackwell. But I also have an option here where I can click Not Listed. I might do that if I wanted to log in directly as root. But here, I'm going to click on Cody Blackwell to log in as that user, and I'll supply the correct password to begin the login process. After I've successfully supplied the login credentials, the Gnome desktop environment begins. From here, I can see in the upper right in the panel that I'm logged in as Cody Blackwell. I could click on that, and from here I have a number of options, such as the option to log out, to lock the screen, or power off the system. I'm going to begin by choosing Log Out. Then I'll click the Logout button on the confirmation screen. When I get back to my graphical login screen, this time I'm going to choose Not Listed, where I'm asked to supply the username. Here I'll type in root, and then I'll put in the root password. Logging in directly as root isn't recommended. We should be logged in with a regular user account, and then when we need to run elevated commands or do something that requires elevated permissions, we can just temporarily switch over to user root. But here, I've logged in directly as root. I'm going to click on root in the upper right in the panel, and from here I can choose to lock the screen. This is a good idea if I'm going to be stepping away for a few minutes. After which, when I try to log back into the system again, it's asking me for my password. So I'll go ahead and put that in. And now I'm authenticated once again to the Gnome desktop environment. I'm going to click root in the upper right of the panel again, and this time I'm going to choose power off. When I choose power off, I have the option of either restarting or powering off the system. In this case, I'll choose power off. In this video, we discussed how to perform login, logoff, and power operations. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to configure email clients. When using the Gnome desktop environment, there are two standard mail clients that get used, Evolution and Thunderbird. We're going to take a look at how to configure each of them to connect to a mail server so that we can send and receive email. I'll begin in the upper left by clicking on the Applications menu. Then I'm going to go to Office, and then I'll choose Evolution. The first time you start the Evolution mail client, it'll ask you a number of questions to configure how it behaves and which servers it should connect to. I'll click Continue on the first page of the wizard. On the second page of the wizard, it asks me about restoring all of my personal data, but because this is the first time I'm configuring Evolution, it doesn't apply, so I'll just go ahead and click Continue again. For my full name, I'll type in Cody Blackwell. For the email address, I'll type cblackwell@silversides.local. I'll then click Continue. On the server type screen, I'm going to choose POP, Post Office Protocol. This is the server that we will connect to for downloading mail. For the server name, I'll type pop3.silversides.local. This is the DNS name of my POP3 server. For the username, I'll type in C Blackwell. There's no encryption on this POP3 server, so I'll go ahead and click Continue. It says it's going to check for new mail once every 60 minutes. I could configure some of these settings, but I'll leave them as they are, and I'll click Continue. For outgoing mail, I need an SMTP server. So for the server name, I'll type in smtp.silversides.local. Again, that name has to exist in DNS, and this machine must be able to resolve it to the correct IP address of the SMTP mail host. I'll then click Continue. I now have a summary of my receiving mail server information as well as my sending mail server information. I'm okay with this, so I'm going to click Continue. Finally, on the last page of the wizard, I'll click Apply. Now it's starting the Evolution mail client and trying to authenticate to the mail system. So it's asking for the password for user C Blackwell. So I'll go ahead, put in the account password, and I'll click Continue. At this point, I'm in the Evolution Mail client and I'm ready to send and receive email. Let's configure the Thunderbird Mail client. To do that, I'll go to the Applications menu in the upper left, and I'll choose Internet, and then I'll select Thunderbird. Now, there's really no need in a production environment to have both mail clients configured on the same machine for the same user. On the first page of the wizard, I don't want it to look for an account or to create an account anywhere, so in the bottom left, I'll choose the button that says Skip this and use my existing email. For my name, I'll type in Cody Blackwell once again, and for the email address, it will be cblackwell@silversides.local. Of course, I'll put in the password for that account, and I'll click Continue. Now at this point, it's looking up a configuration online to see if I have an account. However, what I'm going to do is click Manual Config, because this is a local mail environment. For the incoming server, it's currently set to IMAP, but I'm going to switch it to POP3. And for the server host name, I'm going to type pop3.silversides.local. For the SMTP outgoing mail server, I'll type in a server host name of smtp.silversides.local. Those, of course, must be resolvable to the correct IP addresses where those mail services are running. For SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, I'm going to choose None. There is no security configured on those mail servers, which means that any transmissions over the network will be sent in clear text. I'm going to click the Retest button to make sure it can make the connection to the POP3 and the SMTP host. It looks good because the Done button is now lit up, so I'll click Done. Here I get a warning message that tells me that my incoming POP3 server doesn't use encryption, nor does my outgoing SMTP server. For this configuration, that's okay, so I'm going to click the checkbox that says I understand the risks, and I'll click Done. At this point, I'm now in the Thunderbird Mail client where I'm ready to send and receive email. In this video, we learned how to configure email clients. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to use network tools in the Gnome desktop environment. If we need to see our network interfaces and how they've been configured, we can do that by clicking Applications in the upper left, then choosing System Tools, and then choosing Settings. In the Settings dialog box in the Hardware section, there'll be an icon called Network. That's where I'm going to click once. Here, in the left-hand part of this dialog box, I can see all of the network interfaces on this host. One of them on our machine is called Wired, and if I select it on the right, I get a brief summary of things like its IPv4 address, its IPv6 address, and so on. I also have a slider where I can turn that network connection on or off. In the bottom right, I'm going to click the configuration icon to configure the wired network interface. In the left-hand navigator, for the new dialog box that's opened up, I could click Security, and I could turn on 802.1x security for this network connection. I could also click Identity on the left, so I could change the name of this network interface. I could also choose IPv4 on the left, where we can see on the right, we've got a manual or static IP configuration where the IPv4 address, subnet mask, and default gateway were manually entered, as was the DNS server entry for name resolution. If we need to configure IP version 6, we have options to do that as well. Once we've got a valid network connection, we can then browse the network through our File Explorer. On the desktop, I'm going to open up the Home folder, which we can use to browse the local file system, but we can also, in the bottom left, browse network resources. So in the bottom left, if I were to click Browse Network on the right, I see an icon that I could click on to view items on the Windows network. I could also click on Connect to Server in the bottom left. Here, we can enter an address to a specific Windows host. Here I've typed in SMB for server message block, // and then I've followed that with the IP address of a Windows host. So I'm going to actually connect to it by clicking the Connect button. I've already specified a username and password, so that's why it didn't ask. At this point, I'm viewing shared folders on that Windows host. In this video, we learned how to use network tools in the Gnome desktop environment. In this video, I'll describe the relationship between Xwindows and Gnome. A Linux system can be installed with or without a graphical user interface. The Xwindows system can be added or removed at any time. X is a client-server based architecture. The X server runs user applications, and the X client only needs to know how to render that visually. XDMCP is the original protocol that is used for remote rendering. It stands for Display Managed Control Protocol. So not only can we run Xwindows graphical type of applications locally on a Linux host, but they can also be rendered over a network connection. Some window managers provide only basic interfaces and graphics. And there are many Windows managers available. Most Linux distributions will let you determine which ones you'd like to install. Some window managers include TWM, Fluxbox, Afterstep, and Enlightenment. Full-featured window managers over time eventually became known as desktop environments. Desktop environments still run on the Xwindows system. Some examples include Gnome, KDE, XFCE, Mate, and many others. So you could say then that the Xwindows system provides the framework for a graphical user interface. It handles basic input and output primitives. But bear in mind that the Xwindows system does not provide a user interface by itself. That's where our desktop environment such as Gnome comes in. Minimally, only a window manager is required. However, there's not much you can really do in a graphical environment if that's all you got. So using KDE or Gnome as a desktop environment is definitely recommended. In this video, we describe the relationship between Xwindows and Gnome. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to configure system settings from the Gnome desktop environment. In the upper left of the screen, I'm going to start by clicking the Applications menu. Down below, I'll then choose System Tools, and then I'll choose Settings. Here we have all of our settings centralized and organized for us to use. For example, under the Personal section, what I'll do is click the Privacy icon. And perhaps what I'll configure is the Purge Trash and Temporary Files option, so I'll click that. I'm going to turn the option to automatically empty the trash on. It's set to automatically purge after 30 days. I'm going to go ahead and choose that drop-down list and change that to 7. Then I'll click Close. I'll then click the back arrow to go back to my settings. Under the Hardware section, I'm going to click on Displays where I can control my various screen displays as well as their video resolution. I'm going to click the Back button. Under the Hardware section, I can also configure my printers. Here, I'll click on Printers. I see a number of printers that have been selected, including one that's set as the default printer, which is indicated with the check mark. From here, I could print a test page to that printing device. I could even click the Show Jobs button to show any jobs that have been queued up to that printer. I'll click the Back button. Down under the System section, I can also configure the date and time. I can see the current region and city, which I could choose from the drop-down list if I wanted to change my time zone. I can also turn network time on or off, and I can also determine whether the time is displayed in 24-hour format or AM/PM format. I'll go ahead and go back to my settings. Under the System category, I have an icon called Details. I'll go ahead and click that. Here, I can see an overview of my Linux system, including the name of the device, the amount of RAM, the processor type, the operating system type, in this case 64-bit, how much disk space we have, and so on. In the left-hand navigator, I could click Default Applications and choose the default web browser, default mail client, default calendar client, and so on. I could also click Removable Media on the left and determine what happens when we insert removable media. For example, for a DVD video, it's set currently to ask what to do. But we could tell it to open the folder to expose the files on that removable media. I'm going to click the back arrow. We also have the option of clicking Sharing down in the System Settings area. From here, I can turn on screen sharing to allow remote control over VNC from other network hosts. I can also choose the remote login option to allow SSH access to this Linux machine. Notice that by default, SSH access is on. I'll click the back arrow. We also have an icon in the System Settings section called Users, where we can build additional local user accounts. We can see the current user account for Cody Blackwell. Even though the root user account is not listed, the Linux system will always have a root account as well. In this video, we learned how to configure system settings from the Gnome desktop environment. In this video, I'll demonstrate how to switch between users and desktops in Linux. Here in the Gnome desktop environment, I can click on the panel in the upper right to see who I'm currently logged in as. Here we can see that I'm logged in currently as root. Notice also that the root user has the calculator application open. From this menu, I'm going to choose Switch User. So I want to keep the root session running here in the graphical environment, but I want to spawn another graphical session as a different user. So I'll go ahead and click on Switch User. This is going to give me a graphical login screen where I can select another user account to log in as. From here, I'll choose Cody Blackwell, and I'll supply that user's password. So now, I have two graphical sessions running simultaneously on the same host, one as root, and one, as we can see now, as Cody Blackwell. I'm going to go to the Applications menu in the upper left, and I'm going to start the terminal application. This gives me a command shell as user C Blackwell. Well, another way to switch between users in Linux is at the command line. We can use the su or switch user command to switch between different user accounts. So I'm going to type su and press enter. Because I haven't specified a username, it's assumed that I'm switching to user root. So it's asking for the root password, which I will supply. And we can see now that we logged in as C Blackwell in the GUI, but from the terminal session we switched over to root. We might do this as an administrator so we could perform tasks that require elevated privileges. I can end that root session by typing exit. To log out of this graphical session as Cody Blackwell, I'll click on Cody Blackwell in the panel in the upper right, and I'll choose Log Out. At this point, that user will be logged out, and I can then log in as a different user such as root. So I'm going to log in once again as root, and notice it still has the calculator app running. So everything that was running in that first root session remains. But we can also allow user connectivity to a Linux host remotely through SSH. From a Windows host, I'm going to run the PuTTY command line tool, which is a free download. Here, I've already set up a connection to my Red Hat Enterprise Linux server. So I'm going to open this SSH connection to my Linux server from this Windows host. It starts by asking me who I want to log in as. Here I'll type in C Blackwell, and I'll supply that user's password. At this point, I am now logged in as user C Blackwell. So we can have multiple users logged in simultaneously. If I use the who command to display that, I will see that root is logged in on terminal:0, which is locally at the GUI on the Linux server, but that user C Blackwell, the current login session that we're using, is logged in through a sudo terminal over the network from the host name that is listed. In this case, the host name is danslaptop.silversides.local. So we can see then that with Linux, it allows multiple user connectivity both locally and remotely over the network to a single Linux host. In this video, we discussed how to switch users and desktops in Linux.